I think the easiest and, in my opinion, the best way to get into shooting is to take the licensing course in Canada, the Canadian Firearm Safety course. You can take it anywhere in the country, and one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate of it, and I teach it myself, and why I think it's such a good program, is you have an opportunity to spend 2 days in a classroom setting. There's no live fire. You get to load and unload and explore tons of different firearms that can't shoot a live round, which so you're completely safe, and you have inert or dummy ammunition. And that is a great way to get introduced to guns where there's a lot less stress. So you can actually explore the firearms, understand how they work. You don't have to worry about being hurt or any kind of safety concern. And that's just part of our program in Canada, actually. And one of the reasons why I recommend people do it that way is they're taking the licensing course at the same time as they're learning about firearms. So you're sort of killing two birds with one stone. By just going through that 2-day safety course, you've already fulfilled your obligation under the Firearms Act to take that course. Hollywood glamorizes firearms or using firearms, I think, for the same reason you see a lot of police shows or you see a lot of shows about spies and about operatives and military. I think that people want to get into some other world that they don't have access to, or is maybe unsafe for them to have access to. And a lot of those worlds that are very exciting and lots of action contain guns, because these are the tools that those types of professions use. I think that's why people are drawn to that type of entertainment. In Canada, there are 3 classes of firearms that exist. So all firearms that come into the country are classified in one of 3 ways. The first one, and the least regulated, is the non-restricted firearms. So that's typically rifles and shotguns, long guns, for a hunting or sporting purpose. Then you have restricted, which are typically handguns and certain other firearms based on barrel length and the way that they operate. And some restricted firearms can also be long guns with a military or paramilitary appearance. And then the last classification is prohibited, which are typically very short handguns with very short barrels and full automatics. And most Canadians do not possess or cannot possess prohibited firearms or get a license for those. You have a couple of major parts of the firearm. So you have a barrel, you have a stock, and you have the action. And the action is defined as any part of the firearm that takes ammunition, these things called cartridges, puts them into the chamber, which is the back of the barrel, any part of the firearm that fires that cartridge, and then ejects the unused ammunition or empty casings. So you have the barrel, and you have the action, and then you have the stock. Those are the 3 major parts of a firearm. And how these things work is, at least in this particular firearm, is we load a couple of rounds into the magazine. We insert the magazine into the firearm, we cycle the action once, and we are loaded. So this part here is called the bolt. The bolt's forward, and there's a round inside the chamber. What happens is when I pull the trigger, a little firing pin strikes this part of the cartridge, and this part of the cartridge is called the primer. The primer is filled with a very violent and unstable explosive, so violent and unstable, in fact, that it can be struck with a pin or whatever, and it'll explode. And what happens is when that primer explodes, it sets on fire all of the powder inside of this case. So this powder in a modern cartridge is called smokeless powder. When smokeless powder burns, it creates expanding gases, and those gases expand very quickly, and they can't be stopped by anything. And what they do is they dislodge this bullet, the bullet being the projectile that travels down the barrel, dislodges the bullet, and the bullet travels down the barrel being pushed by the gas. That's basically how guns work. Rifles and handguns are measured in caliber. Caliber is nothing more than the diameter of the bore, measuring across the bore. And I think the only thing that makes caliber confusing is that it can be expressed in metric or in imperial. and it can be measured land to land or groove to groove, and these are just sort of different areas of the cross section of the barrel. But for all intents and purposes, when you see a larger number in caliber, it just means it's a larger bullet. So bullets are actually, when people refer to bullets, they're actually the projectile that travels down the barrel of the firearm. And bullets, the most common bullet or shot material, shot being the projectiles that you get from a shotgun, is lead. And the reason why we use lead is it's easy to shape, it's cheap, and it's heavy. So typically bullets are all made of lead, and they have very often an outer coating that is of a harder material called a jacket, and that's where you get jacketed bullets or full metal jacket bullets. A very popular rifle in Canada is this one right here, which is an SKS. So this is an old Soviet era military rifle. In fact, it's actually the granddaddy of the AK-47. If we're talking about shotguns, shotguns are one of the most popular firearms in the world because they're very versatile. You can put all kinds of different ammunition, shot, which is a bunch of small lead pellets. They can also be very big lead pellets. And you can also have single solid projectiles shot out of a shotgun called a slug. Shotguns are typically non-restricted in Canada, depending on barrel length and whether they're manually operated or semi-automatic. But this is a very typical defense type shotgun. So when I say defense in Canada, that usually means for predator defense. So if you were walking around in the forest and you needed something to protect yourself against bears or cougars or what have you, a lot of people carry these firearms as they're very practical for that use. Tubular magazines have some very significant benefits, but there's also magazine-fed shotguns out there, like this one in particular. So magazine-fed shotguns were movable magazines. This type of mag is called a box magazine, and the benefit of these things is you can load them ahead of time, have one in your pocket or whatever. The gun is legally unloaded, and it takes just that to load it. So they tend to be popular for people, again, for predator defense if you're cruising around in the forest. They can come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them look very laid back, very non-dangerous, like something perhaps that has a wood stock on them. And then sometimes you have them with these rails, these tactical rails and whatnot, all the little extras to put flashlights or optics on. Again, it really doesn't change the function of the firearm whatsoever. It just changes the appearance. Doesn't make it more lethal or less lethal. This is another firearm that's non-restricted in Canada. This is called a CZ858, and it comes from a family of rifles called the VZ58. And this is a rifle from the Czech Republic. Very reliable. Looks very similar to the AK-47, but it's in no way mechanically similar. But this particular rifle is non-restricted. Again, you can take this out to the bush. You can hunt with it. You can protect yourself against predators, bears, cougars, that kind of thing. And it would also be a handy firearm to have in any case. A little bit hard to mount certain optics on it, but very reliable. This is a semi-automatic firearm. So semi-autos are something that a lot of people may or may not understand. Semi-autos mean that this firearm will use some part of the energy from the cartridge actually firing to cycle the action for us. And what that does is it spits out the used casing and chambers a new round into the firearm. So basically these will fire as fast as we can pull the trigger. But unlike full automatic firearms, these will only fire one round per pull of the trigger. So this is not a full auto, this is a semi-automatic. Cool looking firearm, a lot of people like them. It's called a Tavor, and it comes from Israel. Now this type of rifle is a little bit different. This rifle is what they call a bullpup configuration. And what that means is all of the firearm's action. So the action is defined as any part of the firearm that chambers cartridges, fires them, or flips them out of there. The cartridges being the bullets, right? What most people call them. And the Tavor is a little bit different in that all the action parts are here in the back, close to your shoulder. So when you actually hold this rifle, all of the weight is now close to your body. Makes the rifle a little lighter to hold up for any kind of extended period of time, and certainly makes for a cool firearm. But again, because this is a center fire semi-automatic and its barrel length is still 18.5 inches. In Canada, this is still non-restricted, so you can take this anywhere you really want to take this and load it anywhere where a firearm is legal and safe to discharge. So this is an extremely popular, one of the most popular rifles, and in my opinion, one of the greatest rifles ever made by human hands, the AR-15. And there's a variety of reasons for that. This is very similar to what our armed forces use in the United States and in Canada. And although this one is semi-automatic only. In the armed forces, they can have fully automatic, which means as long as I depress the trigger, the gun continues to cycle and push projectiles down the barrel. So this being a civilian version, semi-auto only, despite how fun it looks, it's just a regular center fire semi-automatic rifle, just like all the other ones we've talked about. It's in no way distinct. One of the reasons it's so popular is because even though it was developed in the middle 50s by a guy named Eugene Stoner, it was made to be operated by the human hands, meaning that all the controls are exactly where you'd expect them to be for a rifle that you wanted to operate efficiently. So the magazine release is here by your index finger. When you pull the mag, it's very easy to get to. To close the bolt, there's a switch here that even when you put a new magazine and your hand's sitting here to once you've changed the magazine, you just need to reach up and push the paddle to release the bolt. Extremely ergonomic. When it comes to the safety, it's right here by your thumb. It's just a really beautifully laid out rifle, and they're very smooth and to shoot with very little recoil. So they're just all around great rifle. Another less expensive bullpup option in Canada is the T97 or the T97 NSR. So this is the rifle that the Chinese military uses. These are non-restricted in Canada. You can pack these around with you wherever you go. Not anywhere near as ergonomic or easy to operate as the AR-15 or even the Tavor, but still it's kind of that same bullpup configuration where all of the action parts, what we would consider to be the action, is all back here into the stock, which is close to your body. It's a very not ergonomic firearm. Another type of firearms, in our case, non-restricted firearm, is a bolt action firearm. So some people would look at this and they say, well, that's a sniper rifle. And certainly it has that appearance, which is fun, but it's just a bolt action. It's the same thing that hunters use, same accuracy. In fact, the actual firearm, the barrel and the action is from a hunting rifle. And that's what sniper rifles are, is they're just cool looking hunting rifles pretty much. There's a variety of different shooting sports that you'd find in Canada. Probably one of the most popular is IPSC, which is a organization that uses primarily pistols, but they do have rifle competition as well. There's also 3-gun, which is something that's becoming more and more popular all the time and very quickly, which is a type of competition where you will use a rifle, a pistol, meaning a handgun, and also a shotgun. I think a couple of the most important safety tips for any civilian firearm owner, certainly in our country, is don't load a gun unless you're actually going to shoot it. Keep your firearms unloaded. And even if you have to load a firearm and carry it around, say for wildlife defense, personally what I do is I legally load the firearm, meaning the ammunition is inside the gun or the magazine is full. I just don't chamber around. And that's the best way you can stay safe. If you were to fall down, drop the firearm and went flying, it would never go off that way. Well, handguns are tons of fun because it's very challenging to hit anything with a handgun. Handguns are effective probably out to about 25 meters. So even if you're target shooting with some friends at the range, you're actually going to be shooting at around 10 meters and it's still challenging. So it's convenient in that you don't have to put your targets way out someplace to make it a challenge. And you can also see the targets very well, but it's very difficult and challenging. I think that's why it's very attractive for people. So this is a Glock 9mm semi-automatic pistol. So this is a Glock 17, or some people would call it a G17. And it's a semi-auto, meaning that whenever I pull the trigger and the bullet leaves the barrel, some of the energy from that process cycles the action for me to chamber a new round so I can just pull the trigger again. It's not what we would consider manually operated. In Canada, we have magazine size restrictions. In a handgun, we can have 10-round magazines, and in a rifle, centerfire semi-automatic rifle or shotgun, we can only have 5 rounds. So this is a Glock. You may have heard that term before. Super reliable pistol, very easy to shoot. Just a fantastic product. Been around for a long time as well. The majority of this pistol is made up of a polymer, which is, I guess, a fancy word for plastic, and the rest of the only parts that are steel on this gun are the ones that have to be, so it's extremely light and easy to shoot. Another handgun I've got here is a new handgun on the market. It's a Smith & Wesson SD9. So it's a very inexpensive 9mm handgun. It's a Smith & Wesson product. It's fairly well made. I actually use this gun quite a bit myself, and it's what we would consider a subcompact, meaning it's a little bit smaller of a frame of a firearm. Again, barrel length is long enough that it's still okay to own. This handgun is a Colt 1911, not this particular one, but exactly the same style. It's called a 1911 because it was adopted by the US Army in 1911. So it's over a 100-year-old pistol design, and they probably make more of these today than they ever have. Extremely popular. And there's reasons for that. Really cool gun. It shoots a very big handgun cartridge, 45 ACP. And they're quite reliable if you keep them clean. You'll see a lot of these around. You see them in movies a lot because they're a great looking gun. Another extremely popular handgun in Canada is the SIG P226, and this was I think one of the reasons why it was so popular is the pistol that the US Navy SEALs would use. That was their pistol of choice. And it's a really good looking gun. They're pretty reliable. I find them to be a little bit bulky for me, and they're hammer fired. So it has this hammer in the back that comes down and strikes the firing pin. I tend to personally prefer striker fired pistols. They have no hammers to get caught up on anything. But still, an extremely popular firearm all over the world, in fact. So I think something that's really important for anyone thinking about owning firearms is that you do learn how to use those firearms properly. Firearms can be dangerous, and they can be also very beneficial. They can be life-saving tools. But it's critically important when it comes to those types of tools that you get training and you know exactly what you're doing with them, so that you can avert any accidents or any mistakes that might be very costly in more ways than one. So we spoke about shotguns before. Shotguns are a very versatile firearm. This one has a tubular magazine. So the magazine doesn't come out of it. Basically how this one works is we run the pump forward and we can insert ammunition up into the magazine. Then we have to cycle the action once to chamber around so we can actually shoot it. And that's done like that. Once we shoot this firearm, this firearm in particular is not a semi-auto, it's what we would consider manually operated. So, meaning that every time I shoot a round out of this thing, I have to cycle the action with my own power. The empty case gets flipped out of there, chambers another one, I shoot it again, and I continue on until the firearm's empty. How we prove a gun safe, if anyone's interested in that, how we make sure guns are safe is we cycle the action a couple of times. We have a really good look inside the gun. We're not going to believe our eyes, just in case. We're going to put our finger right inside the action. Not everybody likes to do that, but this is what I do because I want to make sure that if I think a gun is unloaded, it's unloaded. So I do a look, and then I do a touch to ensure that this thing's completely empty. So Canadians have access to a lot of different kinds of firearms. In Canada, we have 2 million firearms license holders, including a lot of those license holders have the restricted license. We also have, we think, around 1.5 million people, give or take, we don't really know, that are still in possession of firearms without a license from back before the law had changed. So all told, we could have around 3.5 million Canadians that are in possession of firearms. So an extremely popular hobby, an extremely popular piece of property to own. But the technical term for this is cartridge. And the cartridge has 4 parts. The first part of the cartridge we'll say is the case, and in this case, as it were, it's made out of brass. Brass is a very popular material for cases. The next part is this little thing right in the center of the back of this cartridge, and it's called a primer. The primer is really important. It's a small metal cap filled with this extremely violent, extremely unstable explosive. And what the primer is meant to do is to be struck by a firing pin or a hammer and explode on contact. When it explodes, it creates a bunch of heat and pushes that into the case itself. Inside the case, we have something called smokeless powder. And when that powder burns, when it combusts, it creates expanding gases. The gases expand very quickly and they cannot be stopped by anything. What this thing is designed to do is those gases expand and they push this projectile, which is at the end of the cartridge. It's actually called the bullet. So when someone refers to the bullet, they're referring to the projectile that travels down the barrel. So those expanding gases push the projectile down the barrel, and this case gets discarded. So that's how a cartridge works. It's got a primer, has powder inside, smokeless powder. It has a case and it has a bullet. In Canada, you can have a wide variety of firearms, including 50 cal. So 50 caliber firearms are some of the biggest available. You can actually even get, non-restricted even, a 50 caliber bullpup configuration like some of the other rifles we spoke about, that is a semi-automatic. So how a cartridge works when it's inside of a gun is kind of an interesting process. What a lot of people don't know is in firearms, there's a tremendous amount of pressure. So inside this is an AR-15, very similar to what our armed forces use, what a lot of ERT teams use. The AR-15 is a great little rifle, but it's very typical in the types of pressures that it generates. The AR-15 with military ammunition will generate somewhere around 62,000 PSI. So this little cartridge, this small cartridge that the AR-15 uses is called a 5.56 NATO, and the civilian version of that same cartridge is known as the 223 Remington. For such a small cartridge, it generates an enormous amount of pressure, gas pressure. When this thing struck, it will generate around, if it's 5.56 NATO, generate around 62,000 PSI. So 62,000 PSI going on in this tiny little device that you're holding up to your face, no less. Just to give you an idea, if you have a big truck, there's about 50 pounds per square inch, 50 PSI in your tire holding your whole truck up. So it's a tremendous amount of pressure, and basically what we want to happen is when this cartridge is chambered and it's fired, the gases are going to push the projectile down the barrel. How we load a firearm is, in this particular firearm, you take the magazine out and you load the magazine first. So first thing we're going to do is put some rounds into the magazine. These are dummy rounds. We're going to grab our rifle, we're going to bring it up, insert the magazine. The bolt's already closed, so I'm actually going to have to cycle the action once to chamber a round so that this gun is ready to fire, and we do that by using the charging handle on an AR-15. At that point, we put the safety on, and I guess if we were on patrol in the military or whatever, away we go with our firearm. I think the idea of firearm ownership by civilians is one of the most misunderstood topics there is. And I think one of the problems is there's not a lot of educational resources out there for people to understand exactly what role do firearms play in our society, why is it essential that we even own firearms, and what is the public safety impact? You know, what connection, relationship, or lack thereof do firearm restrictions or laws have with public safety? And I think that before people debate about whether we should have guns or not, they really need to do a substantial amount of research and reading and really understand that topic, because it's very intuitive for people to talk about it, but it's very seldom for people to really know that topic when they debate.